Cool. So we're on our another episode of the Phantom Podcast, and we have a very special guest, Jazz from the Shuckery, and she's also got some other surprises up her sleeves and announcements. But basically, before we kind of get into learning about the amazing experiences that Jazz has accomplished and where she's going in the future, a little bit about the podcast. We're here to highlight the amazing people in the industry. And they're right around the corner to a lot of our members in the Bay Area. We are talking to a few people in LA, and we're excited to kind of keep growing our user base and listening to all the experiences that we have. But before I ruin this podcast by talking a lot, I'm going to kick it off to Jazz to give us a quick intro and not quick at all. Tell me every little bit about who you are, what you've done, and where you're going.
All right. Hello, hello, hello. Thank you for having me. I was honored to be invited onto the podcast because I'm a little bit of an untraditional restaurant owner, being that I'm not a chef owner. So I think that makes me a little special. Um, let's see, where do you want to start?
I think let's start it's funny because I have this conversation with a lot of people, and some people say go to culinary school. Some people say don't go to culinary school, and those are for chef operators, right? And then there's people who are just like, you know what? One day I woke up and I wanted to start a restaurant. Where do you fit? And to be honest, you might not even fit in any of those
Yeah,
categories.
I'd say D, none of the above. But I did start working in restaurants when I was 16. I'm 33 now, so I'll let you do the math.
Yeah.
I started working as a hostess at a chain restaurant in Tulsa, Oklahoma.
Hmm.
And from there, I just really fell in love. It really worked with my personality of um, hosting people and making people happy. Of course, I've done a lot of therapy on that, making sure I'm not the people pleaser
Yeah.
type. Um, let's see. When I moved to California, I worked, I was going to school at the JC, worked for my sister. She started a business called the Oyster Girls, a
Hmm.
really fun traveling oyster bar. Um, and I worked for her for 10 years, and that was a blast. We grew her business together. And from there, I decided I was really ready for a brick and mortar.
Hmm.
And working at several Bay Area restaurants during that time, as well as a busser, a hostess, finally getting a chance to be a server here in Petaluma at Central Market. I did find it really tough to move up.
Hmm.
Uh, in the industry, everyone tells you, you need experience, but no one's willing to give you the experience.
Yeah.
Um,
It's that
so
catch 22, which is difficult, right? It's like you're a server and you're like, hey, I want to do more. And they're like, yeah, one day.
yeah, or even become, I was not a server until I was 20.
Oh, okay. So 4
Yeah.
years in.
Um, just not having the opportunity, to move up. Actually, even being told that I'm half Latina
Hmm.
and definitely did, and a small woman. So I feel like I definitely, you know, did have some discrimination, but I didn't really
Hmm.
know it was that, being younger, and it was a little bit before like the Me Too movement and um, all of these other things that have kind of come out about the restaurant industry, I would say.
Yeah. Do you
Kind of,
think it's changed at all? Well, you're owning and operating it, so you've created kind of a standard to what you have today. But do you still see that kind of rampant in a lot of other locations or venues or in the
I'm
industry?
I'm so wrapped up in my restaurant. It takes
Uh-huh.
150% of everything that I have, but I know that I'm creating a culture change for the 30 people, the 30 employees that I have. And
Hmm.
that kind of became my goal when opening a restaurant. And I wouldn't say I started with that goal. It was a natural goal of, hey, I want to treat others how I wish that I was treated.
Hmm.
You know, a lot more equity. Um, kind of everyone. It's no secret that a Chinese kitchen, uh, there's going to be Mexican workers in the back, French
Hmm.
Laundry, Mexican workers, every restaurant, Mexican workers. So I
Yeah.
kind of have that unique, being half white, could kind of see both sides really clearly. And
Hmm.
man, it was pretty unfair. So being able to treat everyone equally has been awesome.
Yeah. No, I
it,
love that too.
it
I
makes
love
me
that.
really happy. But I do think that being able to work my way up and around every position in the restaurant, including line cook, dishwasher, really gave me a lot of insight into the like integral role that everyone plays, which is just getting a hot plate of food to the
Hmm.
customer. It seems
Yeah.
so simple, but like it takes 10 different people to make that happen. Um, times, 200 meals. So
Yeah.
a lot goes into every night. So I'd say that's a little bit about where I've been. There's kind of a running joke at my restaurant. Anyone who visits my office, I have a one award on the wall. It's a Best Hostess 2007 from
I love
TJF.
it. So
So
that was the chain restaurant
there's my
that
credential
yeah.
for owning a restaurant.
I love it. No, that's good. And to be honest, there's probably a lot of other credentials and awards that you probably do have or should have that you're not talking about. So you're just being modest. I think just creating that culture within your business right now is something to really look up to. So that's awesome.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And then you were working on the Oyster Girls during like what was the time period that you were so for a full decade. So it sounds like you were doing like two jobs at once.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we do live in the Bay Area.
Hmm.
So
Yeah.
name a restaurant worker who doesn't have two jobs,
Yeah.
and I'll apply.
But also what makes it even sound crazier is Bay Area is wild, and then when we talk about rent, not only from a housing perspective, it must be extremely difficult to even maintain brick and mortar.
That's for sure. My sister is one smart woman, that's for sure. Catering, you have your one centralized cost, your mixed use building, which is definitely going to be lower in rent, and then just a lot less overhead. You're ordering what's already being sold, essentially. And plus, the Oyster Girls was super fun, traveling all over the Bay Area, lots of wineries. It was like I got to be, a tourist where I live, which is always
Yeah.
a lot of fun. So there is definitely a lot to learn when I signed up for the brick and mortar.
Yeah. So then you transition to your current restaurant, right? And what's that called? The Shuckery?
Yes, the Shuckery. We're Petaluma's only oyster bar and seafood restaurant.
Hmm.
I love Petaluma. I've lived here for 7 years, I think. And it's a blast. I would say it was a little hard to break into the restaurant community being so young, and a lot of other restaurant owners are really, really busy. So there wasn't a
Hmm.
big sense of community. And that was one of my biggest struggles in the beginning. That and not being a chef owner. So the restaurant's been open 6 years, and this is my sixth chef.
Hmm.
So that is a really big position in the restaurant to turn over every year,
Hmm.
and very expensive.
Yeah.
Every chef has its own, I don't know. He wants different vendors, different plates, different equipment, that kind of stuff.
Yeah. And that's difficult, but it's a kind of a theme that I'm seeing in the industry a little bit, right? Where those six chefs and those six turnovers, do they happen like once a year, or did they kind of get stacked during the past 2 years around what
No,
was happening?
pretty much once a year.
Hmm.
And it was just a huge learning curve for me, dealing with people that honestly were a lot older than me,
Hmm.
um, had a lot more experience about certain areas of the industry. Um, and then honestly, there's just kind of a dysfunctional kitchen culture that I had to really become aware of and grow my own leadership skills and find my own voice to be able to step up and make sure that there wasn't a toxic work environment back there. So a lot of the
Mm-hmm.
chefs um, had honestly like abuse problems, drug and alcohol abuse.
Mm-hmm.
I have some crazy stories of how they ended up leaving and or never showing up again.
Oh
Uh,
wow.
I had, you know, chefs that didn't want to work for a female owner, um, that kind of stuff. So
Mm-hmm.
that's been the majority. And until I really built up my recipes, learned how to cook everything in the kitchen, learned how to cook everything on the menu myself, that's when I really was like, okay, I get it. This is who I need to find.
Yeah. So you kind of had to replicate yourself in a bit, right?
Yeah, I guess you're right. I was looking for someone else to lead this one of the most important roles in the restaurant. And I guess until I took on that leadership, I didn't understand what that was. And then I was
Mm-hmm.
able to find someone who aligned with my values, which is huge. It
Yeah.
seems really simple, but it took a long time to realize.
Yeah. And I think that you look at that idea, you're building a company or you're building a restaurant, that group needs to kind of flow from the top. So how do you create your core values, your core culture, and then have each person replicate it and kind of represent it as they grow? So I think that's really cool. A lot of people, even in, like, say, the tech industry or the startup industry, are still figuring that out. So kudos to you.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
It was kind of a byproduct
Hmm.
of just owning a business and not, oh, okay, this is what it takes to lead people, which can be scary. And, trusting people, you're trusting a lot of different people.
Hmm.
Um, and
It's
and
the
to not
idea.
be jaded, you know,
Hmm.
to continue to trust and to be open.
Yeah, it's that it's using trust, and then it's also, when you look at the industry, it's, adapt or die, right? It's, how can you move and still provide those experiences for your consumers so that they can keep coming back, while creating this facade that everything is running perfectly back of the house. And that's difficult, right? That is, you talked about getting orders out to people and how many players it takes to make sure that that one order can come out. So it's a little bit, and I've used this analogy before, so my listeners are probably going to slap me in the face, but the idea is that it's a symphony, right? It's like you've got the strings, you've got your bass, you've got, whatever, cello, and kind of the brass instruments kind of all playing together, and each person has to hit their notes so that that one consumer can enjoy their experience. And a lot goes into it that people don't think about. And when you're dealing with churn, especially on your chef, that's extremely difficult to do that and maintain business every day. So
For sure. Yeah.
yeah, that's crazy, and I want to highlight that, and I want other people to understand that's what you kind of went through to kind of build that. And it kind of leads me into my next segue of a conversation, and I asked this question just because it's difficult always letting people go. But what was your memory of your worst fire that you've had to do in your business?
Well, I would say the restaurant, it's a series of fires every day. And what's the biggest one that you have to put
Hmm.
out, like right now?
Yeah.
And there was a literal fire
Yeah.
on opening day with chef number one.
Oh no.
Yes, yes, that's a true story. But let's see. I would say um, I had to let a chef go, and I was honestly really scared of him. He was like this 6'2" Frenchman,
Hmm.
and he was very misogynistic and
Hmm.
made all kinds of comments to my young girls that I just couldn't have. I couldn't have that happen. And and I would say confronting just such a big personality and quite literally a big person was super. scary for me.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. It's not like
uh,
it's a corporate setting where you could just be like, hey, you're no longer with the company, right? It's, people's livelihoods at the end of the day. Well, even in a corporate setting, it's people's livelihoods, but it's difficult because you see them work, and it's there's always that physical attribute, and the reasoning behind, I think, what you when you fired this person was because they're making the rest of the team uncomfortable. That's kind
right.
of what I'm reading into. So that good for you, right? Cut that arm off real quick and then replace it if you can.
Yeah. Yeah. So,
Any ramifications after that?
I mean, he was pretty upset. Looking back, I can kind of laugh on it, but he definitely tossed around some equipment and rambled a bunch of things and um, you know, off. But what are you gonna do? I
Hey,
just
you survived and you grew, right?
yeah, exactly. And my team really respected me for it. Um, I think they were surprised because the reality was for the next 3 months, I was working six nights a week in my kitchen.
Hmm.
Sorry about that.
No problem. Yeah, it's busy running a kitchen or a restaurant, so I assume you're going to get a lot of calls. But you know, that's really cool. I think what I want to transition into, is your current restaurant, right?
Yeah.
And the expansion that you're doing. And my assumption is you picked oysters because of oyster girls. But is there another reason behind why you selected oysters to kind of be the main theme of the restaurant? I know it's the only one in Petaluma, but
So if we can get a little nerdy, if you don't
hmm,
mind,
yeah.
um, my sister and I were both uh, raised, our father figure was a biologist. And so just growing up, really appreciating and, nature hikes and catching crawdads and that kind of thing. Just this general curiosity for nature and respect for Mother Earth. I know that's a little hippie, but it's true. And when my sister moved out here, she became a kayak tour guide on Tamales Bay, and that was sort of this natural route that led us to oysters. But the more we learned about them, they are so cool. Oysters are actually filter feeders, and each oyster filters up to 60 gallons of water a day.
Hmm.
So they really clean the water. They're such a unique. It's a bivalve. It's not a mollusk. They're really unique because they live in this really cool part of the bay. They live in the intertidal zone
Hmm.
where not a lot of things can survive. So, when the water goes out, they're all dried. They close up tight, and then the water comes back in, and there's all of this really unique stuff that goes on in the intertidal zone, and they're just really awesome.
Yeah. No, I never knew that. Like I was talking to Jazz before we started recording this, and I was looking up oysters, and I'm the dumb one in the room, right? It's like filtering up water. You're basically purifying water with oysters. And I started looking this up, and even vegans, the idea of eating sustainable food and not eating animal byproducts. Some are open to consuming oysters, which is super cool. And I don't know if that's actually true, but I read that article.
Nice. Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, you can use their shells. A lot of times, oyster companies they'll send them back to the bay to recreate the reefs that have been broken down. And the reefs protect the water from being eroded uh, from big waves.
Hmm.
Um, there's really a lot you can do, and owning a seafood restaurant can be kind of hard in these times, not only with pricing, but just, global warming in general and our whole environmental impact. I think a lot about it. And, you know, there will be a limit one day to when we won't be able to take any more fish out of the sea. I mean, I think about
Hmm.
that. Um, and so we do limit our impact as much as possible being a restaurant, keeping it to local fish, supporting the local boats that are going out right here off out of San Francisco, Bodega and Eureka, off of
Hmm.
off of Washington. Um, so I don't know. I've never had a lot of money, the most money I've ever had is, kind of cycles through the restaurant. So I try
Yeah.
to cycle that, um, within like an eye shot, basically. If I
Hmm.
can see you and talk to you, then let's support you.
Hmm. And so so what am I understanding is that your oysters are all local in a sense, right? So are they farmed or are they in the wild? Is
I
that a
love
dumb
this question.
question?
No, it's so good. It's such a good question. So, we do get some uh, East Coast oysters because there's a different species over there. Those are the
Hmm.
Atlantic oysters. Um, so the but we do support a lot of oyster farms here on the East Coast, West Coast, and those are all farmed oysters. Most oysters are going to be farmed oysters. There's not very many wild oysters anymore.
Hmm.
Um, but it's a two-part question because farmed aquaculture, if done properly, like with any other technology, is really good for the environment. So, like we talked about some of the benefits of oyster farming already with the filtering, the building back of erosion. So you can really oyster farms and aquaculture in general is a very sustainable way to farm, which can
Hmm.
have a negative connotation.
Yeah. Is the reason why there's not that many oysters in the wild, is it because we just consume them?
We consume so many.
Hmm.
Yeah, and they're so small when they propagate. So to be able to capitalize on that, because it is a business for those guys out there,
Hmm.
uh, you need to have somewhat of a controlled environment. Now there are some farms in on the East Coast who will just throw spat or oyster seed out, and
Hmm.
it's an old farming method where they're just then they go out and they basically rake in the oysters off the bottom. There's a lot of different farming methods of
Yeah.
oysters, um, but here we mostly do a rack and bag method. So we control the environment when they're spawning, and then when they're big enough we put them out in that intertidal zone because there's a lot of
Mm.
stuff that wants to munch on them when they're so small.
And then the location that these farms are created in, are they, because oysters are sustainable and they have positive like net effects in the environment, are they selecting locations where they could reverse kind of what you were talking about previously?
um like oyster farms are in locations usually in bays.
Hmm.
um and I mean you've probably been out to Hog Island, right?
Yeah, I
Oyster
have.
farm, yeah.
Yeah.
So that's pretty typical and indicative of where you'd put an oyster farm.
Hmm.
um that question's a little signed. I don't know.
Yeah, it's a loaded question because I just started thinking, we're living in a very sustainable world, right? Like, if you look at this year, when I say sustainable, a push for sustainability, right? We talk about climate change, we talk about this emergence of plant-based meats, right? So, Impossible, there's Beyond Meat that's like
Alert from
gaining
calendar.
traction, right?
Podcast interview with
And
Jazz.
and and so what we're doing here is what's really interesting. So that's why I was like, hey, if there's a way to, you know a lot about oysters, you source oysters from specific ways, is there a bigger picture here where you can place oyster farms in certain locations to then start chipping away at reversing some of
I
the
think
negative
been,
effects?
there have been people who have it's been a long time since I've read this article, but they brought a bunch of oysters over to an oil spill, right? And the oysters would these weren't oysters that then people ate, but
Yeah.
technically you can because they're so efficient at filtering. So once you then put that oyster back in clean water, it can um, it filters through and you have a healthy animal again. um, they have put oysters in the Mississippi to start to clean up that environment. So the answer is yes.
Yeah, cool.
The
No,
shortage
I
is
I didn't even know that. Like, if there's an oil spill, take out the army of oysters to start chipping away at trying to create clearer waters.
and I'm not sure. I've heard of it once, so I don't know if that's something that I think there's a lot of technology out there
Hmm.
um, that is probably underutilized just because of the amount of effort it takes
Hmm. Yeah,
to.
yeah, and that's the hard thing, and I think when you look at what you're trying to do, I think running a restaurant is a huge endeavor in itself, right? I think a lot of people shy away from it, but I know we're running out of time, but I want to talk about your new location, right?
Yeah,
That I think was just announced a few days ago. So I'm
it
lucky
was.
enough to have you on here to talk about it.
It's out there in the world now.
Hmm.
So, all right, I've had this Shuckery for 6 years, and it's been a lot of fun building a really fun team and learning how to run this business. And with the pandemic, I and all the hardships, I really saw a lot of opportunity for more change. And unfortunately, there were some restaurants that didn't make it. So we scored a really great location. There was a restaurant there, beloved Petaluma restaurant, Dempsey's Brewery, and restaurant on the river. And we're opening Luma Eatery. So it's going to be a plant forward restaurant. There will be meat on the menu, but it's going to be, none of your main courses will come with meat. It'll kind of be
Hmm.
on the side. Um, I think people can get an idea of what true food costs are that way. We'll be able to be really picky with there'll be a really curated list of local vendors.
Hmm.
Um, that way we can really tell the story about meat because it's important for people to really connect with the people that are serving and the people that are growing. And I think restaurants have that unique. If they take the time, then they can really educate their customers on what's going on in the industry and that environmental impact too.
Yeah, that's awesome. And when is that going to be open? So when can I drive over and start consuming?
Yeah, well, I'd love to have you right now at the Oyster Bar. We're
Hmm.
open 5 days a week, Thursday through Monday, and we're located in the historic Hotel Petaluma. We also have a sister cocktail bar right in the hotel, so it's a lot of fun. Happy hour every day at 3. So come on
Nice.
out. And for the new restaurant, you can visit us early summer. We're shooting for.
Okay, cool. So I
It's a
think
city,
that's
guys.
That's I think that's amazing. I think you're following on a trend where you're not only revamping the industry by changing its culture, right? And being and looking at it from an operator perspective, but then also picking up every single component of how it works, right? Is amazing. Number one. Number two, you're pushing a very beautiful sustainable agenda, right? And I know it's one restaurant. You now are at two, so you're chipping away. I think the next time we're going to be talking is, who knows, you might have a national reach, and I hope you
Oh,
do. You
that's
never
awesome.
know.
Thank you. Thank you for having me on and listening to a little bit of my story. And um, it's super exciting. I feel so honored to be able to do this job. It's so dynamic, and I never do the same thing twice. Who knows what my job title is? I don't even know. Depends on the day, the hour, um,
Yeah.
and that's what I love about it.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for hopping on, Jazz. I think for anybody who's in the Bay Area, make sure you make your way over to Petaluma, hit up the Shuckery, tell everybody that you know Jazz, so you can get the VIP treatment,
Yep,
and
I'm
hopefully
always
you'll be
on
there.
site. Follow us on Instagram. Check us out on our website at the Shuckery, and you can learn all about our new restaurant too.
Perfect. Thank you, Jazz. We'll talk soon.
All
All
right,
right. Bye.
bye.